So our series this month is entitled, as Arliss mentioned a few moments ago, This Thing Called You. And that's a title that I have shared with Dr. Holmes because he's written a book called This Thing Called You, which is giving us an opportunity to look at how we grow and shift our own consciousness without beating up on somebody else's in the process, as you heard earlier in our Standing in the Light. The first week of this month, I talked about the human experience. The human experience offers us an opportunity to be positive, loving, caring, and kind to ourselves. The human experience offers us an opportunity to always let something good be said in our thoughts about our own selves and our own intentions. In the human experience, we need to remember that the real source of our power to solve our problems is that universal force for good, which always finds a way that brings us through. And more often than not, these are ways that we would never think of if we always stay in our ordinary mind, so to speak. In the human experience, we are in the process of bringing the human in us together with the spiritual, the metaphysical, which is beyond the physical. That's what having a human experience is all about. It's why we showed up here in this dimension. So the second week, we talked about that age-old tendency to engage in behaviors without really thinking about their effort or their effect, attempting to change a situation that we don't like by trying to change outside influences. How often we mutter those famous words, if only he or she were more like me, ... And when we do this, look at all the energy that we're directing away from growing ourselves in nurturing positive ways. The truth is, though, that we must become what we choose to see. And we can only do that by example. Each of God's created has the choice to become whatever he or she chooses. And when we honor that in ourselves, we create clear, nurturing, compelling examples for all people to observe and to consider for their own lives. The world and humanity does not change because any one of us utters those words, if only you were more like me. It can and does change as each of us chooses to speak, to model, and to exemplify that which is good, just, and loving. Which brings us to today's topic, blessing and accepting. You know me, I love to refer to the cartoons because there are such great moral messages in them. And this, no surprise to you, is a Frank and Ernest cartoon strip. And it offers an interesting suggestion. Frank and Ernest are at the newsstand. Magazines and newspaper headlines are screaming the worst. Famine, epidemic, war. Frank turns to Ernest and says, "You know, I believe in facing reality, but only because I'm afraid to turn my back on it." So some days sort of feel like that, don't they? Like, I don't really know what's going on in life, but if I ignore or deny it, it's likely to really get me. And sometimes in our study of the science of mind, we have a tendency to fall into that habit of thinking that we must deny or ignore what's going on around us or within us in order to be good metaphysicians. And I put the good in quotation marks. In order to be good metaphysicians, to be practicing religious scientists. But there's a difference between ignoring what's going on and denying that it is the only experience or outcome we can have. Denying that it's the only experience or outcome we can have. Let me say that one more time. There's a difference between ignoring what's happening in your life that you don't want or don't like, and denying that it is your only option, your only possibility. And here's still another way of saying that. Disease is a fact. Fear is a fact. Lack of money is a fact. But none of them is the truth of your being. They are experiences. They are not your spiritual reality. So, to be a good metaphysician, we don't have to ignore facts and experience. Instead, we can accept them in the present moment, bless them in the present moment. Then we can affirm the truth and the spiritual reality of our being. And the truth and the spiritual reality of our being is that we are endowed with vibrant good health. We are immersed in the unconditional love of Divine Spirit. And the entire resources of the universe are available to us all the time. Now, to some of you, that may sound like a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of concentration. However, I would suggest to you that each of us is far better served using our time, our effort, and our concentration on being well, on being happy, on being prosperous, on being comfortable, than using all of that for the reverse. Could you agree with that? I think so, of course. Here's an example of how we can get caught in our own limited thinking sometimes. This is the story of a minister who was sent to a small Methodist church in Georgia. During his first Sunday talk, he asked the congregation, "How many of you folks here this morning are Methodists?" And don't you know, everybody raised their hand except one little old lady. After the service, as she shook hands with the minister, he said to her, "Ma'am, I noticed you didn't raise your hand when I asked how many folks were Methodists. Would you mind telling me why?" To which she replied, "Well, I'm a Baptist." Well, the minister could see that some of the people standing nearby didn't appreciate hearing her answer. So he said to her, "Would you mind telling me why you're a Baptist?" "I don't really know," she said, "except that my mother was a Baptist, my father was a Baptist, my grandmother and my grandfather were Baptists." So the minister warmed to this task, and he very gently rebuked her, saying, "That's not really a very good reason to be a Baptist. Suppose your mother, your father, and your grandfather and grandmother had been morons. Then what would you have been?" And without even batting an eye, she said, "Well, I guess I'd be a Methodist." So be that as it may, what we know is true is that the only thing we really own is our own experience. Our journey here is about understanding and acceptance of that. However, if our life and our thoughts are bound to the past or to what others have or have not done, then we are denying ourselves our own creativity and expression. And we deny ourselves the realization that there are many pathways up the mountain, many ways to become enlightened. There are many paths, many ways to become enlightened. The gift in this journey is not the destination, it's the journey itself and the unfolding of our self-consciousness. For when we have a sense of our own spiritual center and we stand in our own power, we can be okay, even when things around us are not. And sometimes we just need to remember that blessed are those who can laugh at themselves, for they shall never cease to be amused. So we all know, of course, that our consciousness creates the people and the events of our lives. When we're courageous and accepting enough, we're willing to look at what we have created in the drama of our lives. And when we are courageous and accepting enough, we know that we can do things differently if and when we so choose. But a part of changing anything about ourselves begins with the acceptance that we don't like whatever it currently is. We bless that for what it is, and we move on from there. It's a matter of promoting what you believe in rather than resisting what you don't. Because what we resist persists. Why is that? Why do some people get so much of what they don't want? And it's about when we are putting our energy on that in the process of acknowledging it, we're energizing it, we're expanding it, we're making it a part of our focus. So when your energy is always devoted to keeping something bad from happening, it's not being used to create anything new. It's not being used to create anything better. The underlying principle behind this simple spiritual practice is this: whatever we resist will persist and grow stronger. Whatever we accept, we can change. Whatever we bless, we change for the good, for the better, and forever. So if there's a challenge in your life right now, silly question. So when there's a challenge in your life right now, perhaps a physical challenge, for example. Perhaps a person who is really getting to you. Perhaps the appearance of lack in your finances. Try this approach. Find a quiet place for a few minutes each day. It doesn't have to be an extensive amount of time. Give your full attention to whoever or whatever is presently before you. As distracting thoughts or judgments occur or arise in your mind, just gently nudge them aside and say this: as you breathe in, I accept you. As you breathe out, silently say to yourself, I bless you. I accept you. I bless you. And the idea here is to quiet your mind and simply be with the accepting and the blessing. This exercise is not intended to provide answers or alternatives. It's a clearing of resistance. The answers, the alternatives, the changes will come in due good time as you have cleared the resistance. Simply a process of releasing the old and acknowledging that it has served you to bring you to this moment in time. You bless that. You accept that that's so. There's no argument about that. Everything that you have been and done and thought has brought you to this moment in time. You're simply recognizing that the way to newness includes honoring what has come before and no longer serves you by blessing and releasing. And you're recognizing that trying to deny or ignore fear simply makes it grow through your resistance to it. There's an old Native American story, which I'm sure all of you know, that illustrates this point. An Indian brave approached his chief and said, "I feel like there are two dogs at war in me. A white dog, which is good, and a black dog that is evil. What's going to happen?" "Don't worry," said the chief. "The white dog will win." "Well, how do you know?" asked the brave. "Because," the chief assured him, "you will feed him." Same story. You will feed. You will pay attention to it. You will work with it. So negative, fearful thoughts control our lives only to the degree that we empower them by feeding them, with giving them attention and energy. Instead, we can learn to accept them and release them. Acknowledge, bless, release. If you have an unwelcome guest in your home, what do you do? Well, one idea is to quit feeding them and they'll go away. And so it is with unwanted guests trying to live in our minds, like fear, like dread, like anxiety. Quit feeding it. And it vanishes, it dissipates from lack of attention. We know this. We know this in pure science now. In addition to in metaphysics, which we've known it for centuries, that we know that there are masses in the universe that when you put your attention on them, appear. And when you take your attention off of them, they dissipate. They simply dissipate because there is no longer any energy flowing toward them. And remember, energy flows to infinity. It doesn't stop along the way. It doesn't deteriorate along the way. It continues on out to infinity. So what you think about keeps going. Positive or negative. That's how it happens. So feed your faith. Feed your trust. Starve your fear. Starve your anger. Starve your distress. So here's some guidelines that we can use in our practice of accepting and blessing to release any old ideas we may have about obstacles to peace in our world. The first is to enlarge your capacity to embrace differences and appreciate the value of every human life. Second, strengthen your resolve to be loving in your thoughts, words, and actions. Third, practice compassion and forgiveness for yourself first, and then extend that to others. Fourth, cultivate moral strength and courage through education and creative, compassionate action. Number 5, use your talents to serve yourself first and then extend that to others. And 6, embrace your spiritual beliefs in the way you live your life and in the way you relate to your world. Many years ago, in another part of the world, a young man grew up surrounded by wealth and influence. As such, he indulged in all the vices of young men of his time, but eventually he changed his life and came to be known as St. Francis of Assisi. One of his former companions came to him and asked, "Why you, Francis? Why you? Why would God choose you to be a lighthouse to the world?" And St. Francis smiled and answered, "Why me? I'll tell you. Why me? Because there could hardly have been anyone who has made as many mistakes as I have. I have done and been everything you can think of that is abhorrent and unholy. I had absolutely nothing to offer the world. That is precisely why I can serve. I can give hope to people who feel they have nothing to give for. For if the Holy Spirit can work through me, It can work through anybody. Spirit can and does work through all of us. As we accept that and bless the ways in which Spirit works through us, we can begin to see a bigger picture, a better picture, a kinder, gentler, more loving picture. By giving ourselves just a few quiet moments each day to accept that which is showing up in our lives, is showing up for a reason. And that reason is so we can learn. We can then bless that process. We can bless the challenge. And we can bless the opening we create through which something better can end. You see, this stuff works for the processes going on in your own life, for the stuff going on in your relationships with those near and dear to you, and for the stuff going on all around the world. The principle of accepting and blessing is a universal one, and it works at all levels. Allow yourself to be open to use this as a way to lift the experiences of your life into a new realm of faith and trust. Remember, whatever you resist persists and grows stronger. Whatever you accept, you can change. Whatever you bless, you change for the good, for the better, for the best, and forever. And so it is.
And so it is.